to the Investigators Report, an in-depth look at some of the world's greatest mysteries and topics of interest. So for the next hour, we ask you to sit back, relax, and fasten your seatbelts as we explore and detail areas in our history, ancient history, biblical history, world religion and philosophy, and unexplained phenomena. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Gary Purefoy with another session of the Investigators Report. And as always, we are very glad to have you with us, to get this opportunity to come into your homes. And we are also very, very glad and once again ecstatic to introduce our very special guest on this particular program. I will let him basically discuss his own work. He's really a gentleman to me that needs no introduction. His work is very well documented throughout the country and even other parts of the world. And it does me great honor and great pleasure to introduce Mr. Stewart Swerdlow. How are you, Stewart?
Fine. Thank you for that great introduction. No one's ever been so ecstatic to talk to me before.
Well, with what you bring to the table, not just from an information standpoint and experience, it does me great pleasure to have you as a guest and to be in your company during this next 57 minutes. Well, Stewart, to get started, you have been called a clairvoyant. You also have done extensive study and presentation on the areas of mind control, and that is based on your experience in the past, which I'll yield the floor to you and allow you to describe, starting with your experience in the Montauk Project. Tell us about that and how that all started and where it took you.
Well, that project began in 1970, and I was in there for 13 years. It ended in 1983. And just as a background so that your listeners know why I was associated with that, my great-uncle was the first president of the Soviet Union, and my family was very heavily politically connected to that country. And so in the United States, that branch of the family was very closely monitored, used in very many purposes, and I was taken as a child, really, and used in experimental research for many years, even prior to the 1970 beginning of the Montauk Project.
Okay.
Montauk really was an outgrowth of the Cold War and of the Roswell experience back in 1947, because there was a need to create global fear, or especially in the United States, a common enemy from which they can install fear programs and mind control, that kind of thing. And when you're a very small group of people and you want to control billions across the planet, the most logical thing that you can do is mind control, because weapons and soldiers are just not enough against so many people. So Montauk really was an outgrowth of that. And it started out being a genetic manipulation. It was also weaponry research. It even led into time travel. And what it did with me and others like me was they tried to create a person who could see into other realities without the use of a device. And that was a continuation of the programs that the Germans were trying to do in World War II. And as people may know, under Project Paperclip from the late 40s onward, the U.S. and Canadian and even British governments smuggled many of the former Nazi scientists into their countries in order to continue working in the projects. The Soviets did the same thing. So Montauk was really under the heading or control of many of these former Nazi scientists. What it did to me, unfortunately, was that from the microwave and the ELF and other experimentations that were done, I was left physically blind for 29 years.
Wow.
Now, although that sounds awful, and it kind of was, I could see energy fields. So in other words, even though I was physically blind, I felt that I could see more than most people, because I could see the energy of both the living beings, animals, plants, and inanimate objects as well. The only difficulties that I really experienced were, for example, driving in rain or snow, the energy of the precipitation would interfere with my visual abilities. I would just see these swirls of energy, and I really couldn't go very far under those circumstances. So there were some drawbacks to that. Also, I could not make out distinct faces of people, etc., words, that kind of thing. So there was a difficulty for those years, but in December of 1999, I had surgery to fix my optical nerves, the way that it connects to the brain, so that today I can see physically. It's kind of an overlay where I see the physical pattern as well as the energetic pattern, which is how I do my work when I do readings and consultations for people. And so the outgrowth, really, of Montauk Project subsequent to 1983 was the development of many of the mood-altering drugs and narcotics, Prozac being one of them, where they were able to control people through medication as well as through ELF and microwave.
Wow.
Now, in Montauk Project, over those 13 years, a lot of information was given out to the so-called test subjects. I was really a very lowly figure in that project. I was the one that was used rather than being in control of anything. I was quite young. And we were indoctrinated a lot because part of the process was to be told that all of this was happening because human beings were not capable of taking care of themselves or being in control of their own governments or lives, because basically they were considered low level. And so this Montauk Project was designed to help control a vast amount of people and for the good of mankind. At least that's what we were told.
Right.
Of course, now I realize that it was quite a heinous operation and had another agenda that we were not told about.
Is it now, just for sake of clarification, with the technology that was conveyed or purveyed, for abuse of a better term, such as time travel and a lot of the mind control apparatuses and the subjects like yourself who had abilities, is it true that this project here on planet Earth was done in collaboration with maybe an alien race?
Yes, the technology that they used was of alien origin. We knew that the Montauk chair, a lot of the time travel devices, and there were many different versions over the years, came from Sirius A for the most part. And the beings from Sirius A were considered to be the most highly technologically advanced civilization that the Earth governments were in contact with, and they told the governments that they had been on the Earth since the time of Atlantis, that even the Atlantean technology came from them. And that is why Montauk was used also, because they knew that the Montauk Peninsula at the east end of Long Island was actually the top of an archipelago of islands that extended right down into the Caribbean area. And when they drilled down into this area, they found remnants of Atlantean technology there, and even pyramids, which could be seen in photographs that were taken in the early 1900s.
So it could very well be true, as my research and many others has determined, that the Bermuda Triangle somehow has a connection with this.
Absolutely. In fact, the Bermuda Triangle is a leftover field from the Atlantean time period. It does have a reciprocal point on the other side of the Earth called the Devil's Triangle from southern Japan to Guam and the Philippines. And if you drew a line or drilled a hole from the middle of the Bermuda Triangle to the other side of the Earth, you would come out on that other point. And that's why the Atlanteans put this device in that location, because it basically energized the Earth's atmosphere and allowed for travel interdimensionally and interstellar travel for their alien visitors, which they did have. The Bermuda Triangle is really the result of a huge crystal technologically created that the Atlanteans built in order to manipulate the geophysical aspects of the Earth and also connect to other dimensions and outside the planet. And now when Atlantis finally sunk, this device was at the bottom of the ocean, And occasionally, depending on the fluctuations in the Earth's magnetic field, seismic activity, what have you, it activates this crystal, and it opens up a vortex and really bleeps out whatever's above it, whether it's a person, an airplane, or a boat.
Wow. So there you have it. We've had small discussions about the Bermuda Triangle, and I've done a lot of work with that, and it's always been suspected that it was of alien origin. And there you have it right there. Folks, you're listening to the Investigators Report. I'm Gary Pureford with my very, very special guest, Mr. Stewart Swerdlow. We have now been talking about the Montauk Project and its origins or its connections with an alien race. And with all that said, Stewart, now let's go to the big enchilada, the history of the universe. Give us the rundown.
Wow, it's a big universe out there.
That's right.
There is an estimated 100 billion stars in our galaxy alone.
Mm-hmm.
And there are an estimated 100 billion galaxies in our physical universe. And we have to also realize that there are infinite universes of all, whether you call them parallel universes, alternate universes, whatever term you want to use.
Right.
So if you do the math, and even if there is 1/10 of 1% of these stars that have intelligent life, that would still make millions and millions of civilizations out there. So it's really astronomical when you think about that the universes are teeming with life, and we're not the only ones, obviously not.
Right.
And so I can only tell you about the history of this galaxy, because that's what I know.
Right.
I mean, I'd have to spend the rest of eternity telling you about the rest of the universe,
Right.
the millions of civilizations. But what we learned at the Montauk Project was that the origin of humankind was in the Lyrean star system, a star called Lyra, Lyra, which is located in the central part of this galaxy, and that was human. And for the most part, and now we have to understand that human in other parts of the galaxy is very different than human here. We're not really considered fully human by the rest of them out there, and I'll explain why in a moment.
Okay.
But on another star system called the Draco star system, which you can see better from the southern hemisphere of this planet, there was a reptilian race created or placed. We feel that this race is not natural to our universe, that there were other beings which were called the Clear People. I write about that in the Montauk Alien Connection book. And they, for some reason, placed and created these reptilian races here in the Draco star system. The reptilians considered themselves to be superior to all other species. Reason being, they are androgynous beings, meaning they're male and female in the same body.
Mm-hmm.
And once you go outside of physical reality into the non-physical, you are just energy. You're not male or female, you're just an energy. And so they feel that as an androgynous race, they incorporate a higher level of God mind than humans do, because humans are separated into male and female,
Okay.
making them lower level to the mind of the reptilian. Another feeling that these reptilians have is that they are more perfect because their DNA does not change over millions and millions of years. It stays stable. Whereas mammalian races constantly change and adapt and evolve in order to survive in the environment. So right away, the reptilians feel superior because they don't have to change. Feeling, if you're already perfect, there's no need to change, whereas mammals are imperfect. So based on those two mindsets, they had an agenda of going out into the universe and assimilating and changing whatever species they found that were non-assimilating and changing whatever species they found that were non-reptilian androgynous,
Mm-hmm.
because they felt it was their obligation to God mind to do so. Now, I'm not going to comment on whether that's right or wrong, because that's how they think.
Right.
You know, humans think in a different way, which they might think is incorrect. But that is why the Draco attacked the Lyrean star system. And the Lyreans, who were very peaceful, almost etheric beings, never had weapons, never had a need for a military, and so the attack was quite a shock. And basically, that civilization was eliminated, and the survivors dispersed to many other star systems in the galaxy. For example, Tau Ceti, the Pleiades, Antares, many other star systems, including this solar system that we're in.
Right.
And over the tens of thousands of years of time, they adapted their physical bodies, these refugees, to accommodate the new environments to which they had fled. Now, the Reptilians, of course, continue their search and destroy mission, if you will, or assimilation mission, wherever they would find colonies of humans or any non-reptilian species in the galaxy. And we were taught back then that 70% of the population of this Milky Way galaxy is of human derivation. 25% is of reptilian origin, and the other 5% is mixed type. In other words, all different other kind of species, including insect-like and other types. You name it, it's out there.
Okay.
Well, the colonists that came to this solar system basically only found 2 planets that were habitable. One is what we now know as Mars, and the other one was a planet right after Mars that was called Maldek. It existed between Mars and Jupiter. And that planet was large, it had an atmosphere, it had oceans, etc. The Earth at that time had the second position from the Sun, and Mercury was there as the first position. And the Earth had no moon. It was completely covered in water and water vapor as an atmosphere. There was very little above the surface of that water. So it was uncolonizable. And Mars was colonizable, so they had a human Lyrean refugee colony on Mars and one on Maldek. And I need to also explain, and it's difficult to do that just verbally. I would need to show you on a board that when planets are formed, when they are ejected as molten material from the star, and then they start spinning in the coldness of space, the outside of that molten material starts to harden. And as it spins, the interior molten material, by centrifugal force, starts to push to the sides and creates a hollow space in the middle, and the excess gets pushed out through the polar regions, which then are creating as an opening.
Right.
And then the interior open space, the lining of that starts to harden as well, so that the molten material then gets trapped between the inside and outside layers of this spinning object. And that's how planets are formed. And at 19.5 degrees latitude on both north and south of such planets, you will find that's where the pressure points are the highest, and you'll find most volcanic activities in those locations, and that's the same on the Earth and Mars and everywhere else. So my point in telling you this is that most planets are hollow because of this planetary formation science.
Mm-hmm.
So now we get to the point where the reptilians, Draco, find the human colonies here in the solar system.
Okay.
They use as weapons ice comets that they drive by creating small black holes that they create in front of them as a propulsion or pulling system. And what they did was to send an ice comet into this solar system in order to destroy those colonies.
Okay.
As the ice comet passed the planet Uranus, the Uranus flipped on its side and is the only known planet that rotates north to south instead of west to east. And it's still doing it to this very day. Then the ice comet went very close to Jupiter, and between the geomagnetic pull of Jupiter, our sun, Mars, and Maldek, the planet Maldek exploded. and created what we now have as the asteroid field between Mars and Jupiter. Some of the survivors that left before the explosion went to the Mars colony,
Right.
and they went inside Mars because they felt it would be safer. Mars is also hollow. As the ice comet went past Mars, it pulled off most of the ocean and atmosphere of Mars, leaving it the way we find it now. And even now, scientists are saying that Mars once had oceans.
Right.
And it does have a polar cap, and in fact, you can see in the Martian springtime plants growing. There's greenery growing in the northern hemisphere of Mars as you get closer to the northern pole there. So that means there is precipitation, there isn't somewhat of an atmosphere, there must be water underneath the ground in order to nourish these plants. There's a lot that the public doesn't realize that science has not told us, or the government hasn't told us before,
Right, that's
but
true.
is now only starting to give us little dribs and drabs
Mm-hmm.
from all of this. So what happened was then, the ice comet got closer to what was the Earth. It started to go into a spin around each other, polarizing the oceans. It started to go into a spin around each other, polarizing the oceans of the Earth, spinning it more rapidly, causing polar ice caps to form and land masses to rise up. And then the Earth and the ice comet switched positions, and the ice comet took the second position from the sun, pushing the Earth into the third position. And then the ice comet, being closer to the sun now, melted the ice around the comet and created a very thick cloud cover. And we now know that object as the planet Venus, which is completely covered in clouds. And why? But now the Earth was colonizable because the oceans had been polarized. There's land masses that appeared. The atmosphere was now less liquid in it. And so the reptilians drove another object into the solar system and parked it in orbit in order to colonize the planet. And we now know that object as the moon.
Mm-hmm.
Moon is not natural. In fact, it is the only known object in space, supposedly natural, that does not spin. It rotates around the Earth, but only one side faces at all times, just like a vehicle that be parked in orbit.
Right.
And if you send a sonic resonance off the surface of the moon, it pings like a hollow object, and it does not thump like a solid object. And in fact, years ago when I was working in Switzerland, there was a science magazine in Switzerland in 1999 or 98 that said the moon should be reclassified because it's hollow and it's not a natural object. So European scientists know a lot about this and actually reveal that to the public more than here in America.
Well, one thing that never gets mentioned, Stewart, and I'm surprised that it doesn't, and I guess this, as you said, attributes the fact they tell us what they want us to hear, is the fact that was many trips as we have gone up in the moon, the Apollo mission, is the fact that was many trips as we have gone up in the moon, the Apollo missions and what have you. It is quite obvious that the moon has no atmosphere. So that would be one clear indication as well.
Well, the other interesting thing is that NASA has recently 3-4 years ago, admitted that there's a very thin atmosphere on the moon and that there might be water.
Oh, that's right. I remember that report.
Yeah, and if you also remember, the astronauts who circled the moon and went to the dark side that we never see, they reported that there was something going on.
One clear indication as well.
Well, the other interesting thing is that NASA has back there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's actually lakes and other domed areas. And if people have a telescope, a high-powered telescope, on a clear night, a full moon, and you train it at any large crater on the moon, you will be able to see objects and things moving and lights, etc., because there's high activity going on up there.
Wow.
And you will also see remnants of objects that were destroyed as if some kind of a war happened on the surface of the moon. It's quite obvious. And And the other factor is that the craters on the moon are not the result of asteroid bombardment. They're the result of a decoy. It's fake. Because craters, when an object hits something like a moon, it doesn't create flat-bottomed craters. It creates deep holes with debris on either side. And now we have these flat-bottomed craters with these even rims around them as if they were manufactured. So I find that quite fascinating as well.
That is. Folks, you're listening to the Investigators Report. I'm Gary Purefoy with our very special guest, Mr. Stewart Swerdlow. We are now in the process of discussing the history of our galaxy, if you may, and we're talking about the moon. And one question I do have, Stewart, before we proceed, the moon in and of itself, being that it is hollow, and I'm pretty sure you can remember this film, it was probably one of the first science fiction films that I watched in its entirety when I was a kid, which was called the movie First Man in the Moon. And what that film illustrated was a mission basically done by a Wright brothers kind of operation. They built this ship, and they, between two men and one of the guy's wife, they landed on the moon. And what they discovered was a somewhat insect-like reptilian race that lived inside the moon. Could it be possible that some of that information came from what we're discussing?
Well, I worked in Hollywood for a number of years, and I can tell you from what a lot of producers that I've met with, they're told basically what to create and how to present it in such a way that the public can understand or assimilate the information. Now, of course, these fiction movies, science fiction, etc., even TV shows, are designed to give out information in such a way that it's a revelation of what something really is about. It's not the complete truth, and it's given in a way that they want you to know, but it still tells you something is different than what you were taught in school. And recently, there's been stories on CNN and AOL science section that says the moon actually came from somewhere else. It's not from our solar system. It doesn't match anything here.
So they're starting to disclose that.
They're starting to give that information out, exactly. And people should question, why do we have this space program that supposedly went to the moon and all of a sudden stopped? Why would they go that far and then ignore it? Because there's something else there that cannot be revealed. And in fact, many of the astronauts who have come forward to say that they have seen vehicles in space that were not from here, and even have photographed them.
Right. Absolutely.
And not long, back in the 70s and early 80s, Leonard Nimoy hosted a show called In Search Of, which really revealed a lot of information in a way that the public could assimilate without going into too much detail about it. That was a very interesting show. So the reptilians from the moon colonized the Earth, and they colonized the largest continent that was above the surface at that time, which today we have called Lemuria. And they were there for quite a number of millennia alone, and they developed quite a civilization on this planet. Today, we still have remnants of that in various locations around the Pacific Basin. And then finally, the humans who were refugees colonized the second largest continent, which we came to know as Atlantis. Now, you have to understand, and I'm making a very long story short, that humans and reptilians are not designed to live in the same environment. They're not made to live in the same culture or planet even, because they're very different species with different mindsets. They don't belong together, so to speak. It's like you wouldn't put a wolf in with a chicken, it just doesn't go together.
Right.
And so there were a lot of wars between Atlantis and Lemuria. The Atlanteans had a lot of technology that was designed to create geomagnetic disturbances that fragmented Lemuria initially. And the same happened with the Atlanteans. There was a lot of breakup of the original continents over the millennia due to wars. The reptilians were the ones who brought the dinosaurs here. the Atlanteans tried to kill them because they were destroying a lot of the planet. Mm-hmm. So it's a whole scenario by itself.